Alright guys, so I'm going to walk us through The Yellow Wallpaper, which is a very famous text by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. And it's one of my favorite because I think it has this amazingly grotesque, creepy ending, which is not expected in a lot of feminist literature. So The Yellow Wallpaper starts by looking at a real situation. Women who suffered from psychological issues such as postpartum depression, which is what this one is about, were described in the Victorian era as having female hysteria. They were prescribed a cure called the rest cure, and it came from a real doctor who said that the best way to keep them from having overstimulus was to take away all stimulus. So they essentially remove them from their home, take them out into the countryside for an extended period of time, and have them in a room, and basically don't let them do anything. So they can sit in their bed or they can walk around the room, but there's nothing creative to overstimulate them. So no books, no writing, nothing of any sort that was an entertainment or a means of really communication. The idea was to kind of calm the mind and then calm the person from that. As you can imagine, I'm sure it worked in some situations, but Charlotte Perkins Gilman takes very sincere critique with this. So what she's done is she had the experience herself. She did have to do the rest cure after she had her child. But you see there is heavy, heavy resentment against men who impose this upon her. And so she writes it from a first person point of view, which is significant because we really see, there's no way to see into the mind of this woman unless you write it from that point of view. So if we're going to start by looking at it, she talks about every time her husband comes in the room, it exhausts her. She gets very tired. And he means well, and she keeps saying, my dear John, my dear John. She knows he means well, but she cannot help but be exhausted every time he's around because he treats her like a child. He calls her my dear, and forgive me, I'm looking for it. He says, bless her little heart. And he talks about her in third person constantly, which is very interesting, as if she's not really there, as if she can't really understand him. And so at the beginning we have a woman who is very sane, and she's writing about her experiences because she's having to sneak the paper. She's not supposed to write. So she says, we've been here 2 weeks and I haven't felt like writing before that first day. And then she talks about how John doesn't really know how much she suffers. So I'm on page 365 right now. He knows there's no reason to suffer, and that satisfies him. So he's happy as long as he's done his duty by taking her out to the countryside. He's not really paying attention to anything that she's actually saying. He's just kind of like, okay, dear. So the baby has been taken away from her because that's another stimulus. So she's not supposed to see the baby. So the baby's being taken care of by a woman named Mary. So she's primarily in isolation. If you look on page 366, right in the middle of that page, she says, I think sometimes if I were only well enough to write a little, it would leave the press of ideas and rest me. So she's restless because the thing that would take away her restlessness is what they say causes it. And she knows this is not the case. So she's saying the rest cure is the problem itself. It's causing the problem. As we move across the page, we start to see this discussion of the wallpaper. And it's very important because the wallpaper becomes a clear metaphor for her and the rescuer and everything that's kind of happening with feminism at the time, which there was no such thing as feminism at the time. But this is sort of the roots of the start of feminism. We see this yellow wallpaper, and she describes it as this horribly ugly with all these weird patterns. And at the bottom of 367, she says, I can almost fancy, when the sun shines on it, I can almost fancy radiation after all. The interminable grotesque seems to form around a common center and rush off in headlong plunges of equal distraction. It makes me tired to follow it. So we have this image of like this sort of movement within the wallpaper, and it's something that we're going to see come more and more and more to life in a kind of terrifying way. See John, and he talks about her like she's a child. So she is marginalized and completely removed from things that make her a fully fledged woman adult. He says, oh, bless her little heart, she shall be as sick as she pleases. Well, let's go to sleep and we'll talk about it in the morning. So John is no help at all. John is really part of the problem as well. He just dismisses everything that she says as part of her madness. And that's going to lead to her real madness. So we go on and we see her say, the fact is, I am getting a little afraid of John. So there's a fracture in this relationship which is very, very evident. She's no longer trusts the man that who brought her here, put her under the rescue, everything. He controls everything about her. And she says, it strikes me occasionally, just as a scientific hypothesis, that perhaps it is the paper. So she starts to transpose her worries and her fears onto the paper itself. And the paper starts to become her. And Gilman does this incredibly skillfully because she doesn't come out and say, and then a madness started to consume her. You see the madness set on her. So she says it was because of that wallpaper that he would make fun of me. He might even want to take me away. Now she doesn't want to leave this place because she has to know what's behind the paper. About the strangest yellow of that wallpaper. Makes me think of all the yellow things I ever saw. Not beautiful ones like buttercups, but old, foul, bad yellow things. And she says, I find it, the thing, hovering in the dining room, skulking in the parlor, hiding in the hall, lying in wait for me on the stairs. It gets into my hair. So you see the madness really start to take hold of her, but it isn't madness at all. It's madness, it's the cure itself has brought this on. And the isolation is starting to drive her sort of crazy. She realizes that the figure behind the paper is a woman. So we go to page 370. She says, and I'll tell you, I think that woman gets out in the daytime. I'll tell you why privately. I've seen her. It's the same. I'll see her out of every one of my windows. The same woman, for she's always creeping, and most women do not creep by daylight. So this woman that's supposed to come out of the paper is hunched and grotesque and creeping along the ground. So this is not a healthy figure of a woman. This is a woman who is broken and mangled by situation. And very slowly you see there are hints that she and the woman are switching places in her mind. She's becoming the woman. So on page 371, the very end, is where all of this sort of comes to a head. So she says, how do those children tear about here in her room? The bedstead is fairly gnawed, thinking in her mind it's the children. If we move down, though, we see that she tries to lift the bed. She says it won't move, so I bit off a little piece of one of the corners, but it hurt my teeth. So we realize that she is the one that has been gnawing the bed. She doesn't understand that she hasn't been doing that. And then she says, I don't like to look out the window. There are so many of those creeping women. They creep so fast. And this is a very chilling image. And in the next line, in the next two lines, she, the woman in the wallpaper, becomes I, the woman in the room. So she has melded the two in her mind. So she says, I wonder if they all come out of that wallpaper as I did. So now she is the woman. She's the trapped, creeping woman behind the cage. So if you keep going down, you see that she starts to literally creep along the floor, tearing the wallpaper off so she can get out. And then you see the madness as she says, why, there's John at the door. It's no use, young man, you can't open it. And you can imagine John banging, trying to break down the door. And she says, John, dear, in my gentlest voice, the key is down by the front steps under a plantain leaf. And then he says, open the door, darling. She says, I can't, it's down there. And then he opens the door, and he cries out, for God's sake, what are you doing? And if you can imagine this, she is on the ground with her shoulder sort of right where the wall meets the floor. And she's creeping along the edge, tearing the wallpaper off, gnawing at it with her teeth. You can imagine the grotesque image that is here. It's really kind of terrifying. And then she says, I keep on creeping and I look over my shoulder. And she says, I've got out at last. So she is the madness. I've got out at last. In spite of you and Jane, I pulled back most of the paper so you can't put me back. So you can't put me back in this jail. And then she says, now why should that man have fainted? So we don't see it as, and John fainted and I was concerned. We see it as, and why should he have fainted? Silly man. And then she says, I had to, but he did, and right across my path to the wall. So I had to creep over him every time. So the ending image is John fainted on the floor, and she's just crawling over him around the room over and over and over and over again. And so it's an incredibly powerful story, and one that is absolutely terrifying. But the point of it is that this madness would not have come upon her if she had not been confined to this isolationist room by the patriarchy, by her husband, by the doctor, by everyone who thinks they knows what's best for her. And really what she needed was that creative outlet, that way to connect with other people. So this is the yellow wallpaper. Hopefully you figured out a few imagery details, symbols, personification, all kinds of things in here to use. Make sure you take notes on your chart and go ahead and finish up the last activity and then head back to week 6.